أعزائي المشاهدين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. نرحب بكم في حلقة جديدة من برنامج الحد الأدنى. لعل عوامل الجغرافيا السياسية أصبحت تشكل العالم في الوقت الراهن، كثير من التقاطعات الإقليمية والدولية، ولعل مفتاح فهم هذه التطورات العميقة والمعقدة لا تأتي إلا بفتح باب الجغرافيا السياسية. من حسن الحظ يزور البلاد هذه الأيام البروفيسور ميشيل فوشي، وهو خبير استراتيجي وخبير في الجغرافيا السياسية في الجامعات الفرنسية. نرحب بك في هذه الحلقة، ونحن نقلب صفحات النقاش حول هذه القضية الهامة. Mr. Ambassador and Professor Michel Fouché, welcome to our program.
Bonjour.
من حسن التعريف أن نبدأ أن الدكتور فوشي هو أيضا مستشار في الشؤون الدولية، وحصل على درجة الدكتوراه من جامعة السوربون 1986، وهو الآن مدير الدراسات البحثية والتعليمية في معهد الدراسات المتقدمة في الدفاع الوطني، وهو أيضا مستشار لمكتب السلم والأمن في الاتحاد الإفريقي. عمل سفيرا لفرنسا في لاتفيا، ومنذ عام 2007 هو عضو في مجلس العلاقات الدولية. البروفيسور فوشي عامل رئيسا لكرسي الجغرافيا السياسية العولمية، وكذلك برامج مكافحة العنف، وهو أيضا رئيس كرسي الجغرافيا السياسية والتطبيقية. It might be a right moment, an introduction to start our discussion with the globalization. Globalization is a main factor shaping right now our perspective to the world. And most important, that globalization affect the normal life of the people, especially for the movement of people, services, ideas, and the borderless. How globalization with the concept of borderless communication affect culture and identity of the people right now?
I think you're right. My perspective as a geographer is that globalization is a scale among others. The international system is based on another scale, which is the nation state. International system or interstate system, better said.
System, yeah.
And you have regional scale, African Union, IGAD, ECOWAS, European Union, and you have global scale. What is new is that what is happening at the global level is becoming prominent, imposing rules or lack of rules, products at other scales. And so you can observe a kind of contradiction between economic and financial globalization and the need for any country to keep its sovereignty. So at the same time, borders are open to goods and ideas, especially with the digital revolution, or a selection of ideas, not and images for the others. And at the same time, there is a reaction, defensive reaction, against the risk of losing sovereignty.
Yes.
So this is the first fact. So we live in an interdependent and interconnected world. Interdependence, it's a good example of that between China and the US. China needs US markets, US technology, and US companies, electronic companies, needs
Cheap labor,
more than cheap labor, reactive labor.
yes.
And now, with the new administration in Washington, the former driver of globalization are starting to reverse their policy because they understood that China was the best student of globalized theory and the more efficient country after China joined WTO in 2001. And now you have a competition which is not a classical geopolitical rivalry, but a competition about what I call geotechnology.
Yes.
Because China understood that mastering technology is one of the key of today's world power. So we are in a situation where globalization is disputed by its main promoter, United States, and is disputed by national sovereign state, which, and it's our case in Europe, we cannot accept extraterritoriality of American law. And we are obliged to do that because we are negotiating, for example, oil in US dollars. So we are losing sovereignty today with stupid US sanction against Iran, for example.
Correct.
We are losing sovereignty. And so we are trying to work hard to see how we can reorganize ourselves to try to emancipate from this kind of sanction reflex and sanction new diplomacy in the US. So, and the last point, we can come back to that, interconnection, interdependence, digital revolution.
Correct.
Which is changing everything.
Yes. I would like also to shift the focus to after the demise of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. There was a lot of studies, but the most prominent one about the clash of civilization by Huntington. And at that time, at the end of the Cold War, most of the people and the scholars think that that was the end of geopolitics. Clash of civilization, clash of cultures replaced the geopolitics, which was the main feature of the Cold War. Right now, we have an article, The Return of Geopolitics Again. We published an article with that name. How far do you think that the return of geopolitics at the international political arena start to shape the world order for the time being?
I think that after what you call the demise of the Soviet system, which crumbled from inside, it was not a Western plot.
Internal decay.
Internal decay because arms race, inefficiency of the economic system, and still Russia is rather weak. Russia is not an active participant of economic and financial globalization. Russia has other means of action, diplomacy, Orthodox Church, military system, UN Security Council. But Russia has a GNP of Spain, and except weapons, nuclear industry, and oil and gas, and some agricultural product today, Russia is not an active part of globalization. Russia joined WTO 10 years after China. And today China has a GNP 8 times bigger than Russia GNP. At the time of Gorbachev, just before the end of the Cold War, both GNP was on the same level. So 8 times.
Correct.
So Russia missed something in that respect because they were not prepared. So it was a collapse from inside. Western reaction was a reaction of pride, hubris. short period of unipolar world. At the time of Bush father and also British rules, German unification, I think France was more cautious about it. I remember President Chirac, as I was nominated as ambassador, giving me an instruction.
You are ambassador to Latvia?
Yes, close to Russia,
yes.
Former Soviet Republic. Don't humiliate Russia. So he was not in that line. The French have never been
Correct.
in the hubris, Western victory. And today...
But the extension of NATO also threatened?
Yes, yes, extension of NATO is linked to, you know, perception of threats in Central Europe and something which we could discuss, of course. It's a fact. It's a fact. And this is coherent with the deep feeling of the population of Central Baltic and Balkanic Europe.
Correct.
They need security, and they don't want the security to be provided only by Germany or France because of the past, so they consider Washington as a guarantor of last resort. It's a fact.
But the return of geopolitics factor in shaping international system.
Yes, after unipolar world, 15 years, other poles are emerging.
Yes.
I would say first China, but on its own terms, because China has a different view of the international system. They don't refer a lot to geopolitics, and they don't display their ambition. They are very cautious. But also Europe is emerging as a power of balance, of equilibrium between Russia, United States, and let's say East Asia. So I think geopolitics was always there. But we had a short parenthesis of hubris, unipolar world. Reality is that the world, multipolar, I don't know, because multipolarity has to be organized. The right place to do that is like the photo in your generics, it's United Nations Security Council. And today, we have a very sad impression that the promoter of multilateralism is methodically deconstructing international system, because they prefer the White House today to have bilateral relation. So they destroy UNESCO. They get out of UNESCO.
They are against multilateralism.
They are against North American trade agreement, against Trans-Pacific. They are pushing for Brexit. They don't like the European Union, and they don't like the nuclear agreement on Iran. So they prefer to have strictly bilateral relation, because in each bilateral relation they are stronger. This is absolutely not the French, the German, and even the British and the European view. We want to abide by rules, not by force.
Yeah, we're coming to discuss definitely. I mean, the European Union as a bloc of political and economic influence in the world, but it's better maybe to focus at this moment to the African border. You serve an advisor to the Peace and Security Division at the African Union. You have visited a lot of countries and giving recommendation and advices. But the African intellectual think that the inherited borders from the colonial time was meant to maintain the division between the tribes inside the nation state in Africa, between countries, as it happens before. And they put all this responsibility on the shoulder of the colonial power. For how long do you think that the colonial power in Africa before, the European one, affected and cause some division because of artificial borders inside nation state and between states.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue because you have many stereotypes and prejudices. First, on the side of the intellectual of the some African intellectuals close to Pan-Africanism.
Yes.
Nkrumah. There is the idea of a original, united Africa, which never existed before. Never.
In their mind only.
Only in their mind. African unity is good as a dream, and everybody needs dream.
An inspiration.
But so to criticize European colonial power on the fact that they destroy African unity, pre-existent, it's a miss. It's a miss. Second, of course, after Berlin Conference, you had a scramble for Africa, division of countries according to British, French, Portuguese,
Belgium.
German, and also Turkish interest, because the northern border of Africa is of Turkish origin.
Correct.
Or Ottoman origin.
Ottoman Empire.
So it was imposed from outside, according first to external power interest. It was drawn in a very short period of time, 15 years. And it was not respecting, let's say, pre-colonial configuration, even if you had many exceptions. If you look at the border between Nigeria and Niger, it's the northern limit of Sokoto Emirate.
Correct.
So borders between former colonial power are rather stable. The problem, I don't want to enter into more technical issue, but the problem of border is coming from internal administrative limits suddenly transform into international borders without accurate demarcation. Only 30%, more or less, of today African borders, 82,000 kilometers, 82,000 kilometers. Only 30%, more or less, are properly demarcated.
Demarcated, yeah.
And this is becoming a serious issue, because let's go to Western Africa. If you want to have, against terrorist threats, transnational terrorist threats, binational patrolling operation, let's say between Mali and Burkina, as you did between Sudan and Chad, which is the first experience of that.
Correct.
Binational patrols. You need to know exactly where is the border. The border has to be demarcated. So, and the two other points. Against the dream or the myth of African unity, before colonization, you had politics in Africa, you had kingdoms, chiefdom, some of them very well organized, Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana, Mosi Kingdom, you had Songhai Empire, you had Zulu, you had in Sudan, etc., and you had geopolitics. Even if we don't have written sources.
But division within the African people, African tribes, start with the demarcation of the colonial borders.
I don't think so. We have to look. I think the problem, of course, in certain cases you have division. Hausa region or Ewe or in some places.
Not but because, Mr. Fouché, they think that the colonial power meant to have administrative border rather than...
Inside their territory, yes.
Yes, administrative rather than
the problem,
tribal
The problem
borders.
is not when they cut, because anyway, today we observe open borders in Western Africa, for example.
Yes.
And ethnic people
borders.
they are soft border, and many people are living from the border, precisely. Now, the problem of African border is that they left big states, huge, and they put together people which had historical contentious relation. This is well known. I don't want to go into detail.
But connected to this, Mr. Fouché, I mean, after the establishment of the African Union and before that, the first declaration is to honor the inherited borders from the colonial powers.
Yes.
But unfortunately, after that incident of separation between states, African states, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan.
Only two examples.
Only two examples. And I remember in 2009, you said in an interview, Sudan will never accept the result of referendum for having South Sudan. You said that. It's documented for me.
You want me to repeat it? I'm against secession.
You're against secession.
This is not the right way to solve political problems. Coming back to history, because it's you know, there are external borders. In certain cases, they fit with the former pre-colonial limits, but not always, of course.
Yes.
Second, colonial period was very short, 2 generations. Third, I think head of state and government, when they met in Cairo in July '64, were very wise to stick to inherited borders, like it or not.
Correct.
And they did that because Morocco and Algeria fought a war the year before, in '63, the so-called Sand War, because the border was not demarcated, and Western Sahara problem started at that time. It was a competition between Morocco and new independent Algeria, 1 year after independence of Algeria. So the head of state were afraid of a complete dismantling of the situation, because if you don't stick to the colonial border, which is the criteria? Criteria will be force, based on massacre. Only force, no rules. And this decision, this Cairo Declaration, was almost fully respected, except the 2 cases you mentioned. Eritrea and Ethiopia is...
Do you have any interpretation from geopolitics perspective for separation?
For Eritrea, Ethiopia, I think this is nothing to do with geopolitics. It's a conflict between brothers from the same ethnic group, speaking the same language, and belonging to the same political party. So
South Sudan is different.
South Sudan is a different story. This was imposed. I don't know how much I can tell what exactly I think, but I'm talking about a free geographer. It was imposed from outside.
I do agree with you.
By evangelist church,
correct,
actors from Hollywood, State Department to punish one regime. They did the same in the Balkans with Kosovo. I was completely against this issue of Kosovo.
Yes.
And, you know, from time to time, you don't know in diplomacy what is the right decision to take, which position to support or not. I always tell my audience, you know, when you are in geopolitics, you are not in history. When you are in history, you know the end of the movie. You know who won.
Yes.
In a Western, you know, a love affair, you know the end of the story. When you are in diplomacy, when you are in geopolitics, you are in the middle of the movie. You don't know what will be the end, happy end or not. What to do? Scenarios. So you take a position on one side. When I observe today, this half of the active population of Kosovo left this non-viable country. And I think for the region...
And for South Sudan is example for...
It's not a mess.
It's
pure tragedy.
Correct.
It's a tragedy. So I think, but you had in the US and in Europe also some conservative trend or neoconservative trend thinking about punishing one regime by splitting territory. They had the same plan for the Kivus and for Kurdistan.
Correct.
And you find the same school of diplomacy in several countries, including in my country. A former French minister supported independence of Kosovo, independence of South Sudan, and he wrote a paper about independence of Iraqi Kurdistan. I think this is not the right thing to address. So in this case, this is not a problem of geography, it's a problem of politics. In geopolitics, what is important is politics.
Politics. Mr. Fouché, I mean, thank you very much for that. We're going to have a brief break, then we come back. أعزائي المشاهدين فاصل قصير ثم نعود فابقوا معنا. مرحبا بكم أعزائي المشاهدين مرة أخرى في برنامج الحد الأدنى، ونحن نواصل النقاش مع البروفيسور ميشيل فوشي، هو الخبير الفرنسي في قضايا الجغرافيا السياسية، حيث وقفنا في الجزء الأول من هذا الحوار حول قضايا الحدود داخل أفريقيا وقضايا الانفصال التي حدثت، وكذلك قضايا العولمة وتأثيرها على مسألة الجغرافيا السياسية. ونواصل الحوار مع البروفيسور فوشي. So Fouché, right now, the concept of border and geopolitics, after the new wave of populism that started in the US with the election of President Trump, and the influence of that in Europe. Most of the Eastern Europe right now has the same political mentality of nationalism. We have seen that in Germany, we have seen that in different places. And some countries start to build walls, building fences. In US, between the border of the US and Mexico, there is a plan for border. Different countries in Europe, they're opposing standard policy of immigration, but they would like to build fences. Do you think the concept of this building new fences against migration for the main sources, mainly from Africa, will be a way out to stop this kind of phenomena? And what is the right perspective to tackle and deal with the question of immigration?
Yes, it's a very difficult issue, which implies first a real analysis of the situation of several categories of migration, between economic migration and refugees asking for protection. So it's not absolutely the same kind of story. And we have also to look at countries of origin, countries of transit, countries of destination, having in mind that some countries like Sudan are belongs to the three categories. And by the way, we should congratulate Sudan for its sense of hospitality. This is not well known abroad. I think you should explain more that you are doing with refugees from critical areas from South Sudan, from this strange regime in Eritrea, and you have received
more than 2 million.
2 million people, and this is not well documented abroad, and especially in Europe. This is a migration short of war and crisis. Let's take normal situation. Migration is not new. In the past, more than 20 million Europeans left to Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand, and South America, more than 20 million as workers. It's not new. Mobility is part of human life. And in Sudan, you know that very, very well.
Yes.
For millenniums. And so we have to organize mobility because this is an aspect of, let's say, popular globalization.
Yes.
You are a student in Dakar at Antadope University, which is a good university prepared for 20,000 students, and they have more than 100,000 students. Some of them want to leave because they cannot study anymore. And they want to be successful. They want to support the family. So we have to work more on the factors, the drivers of out-migration. And we have to organize that through what I call mobility pact between individual countries. Let's say Senegal, Mali, and France. Why? Because migration from Mali or Senegal to France started more than 1 century ago. Not yesterday, because of terrorist attack. It's a very old story from the same place. And you have a diaspora.
Number might be different.
I'm not talking about refugee, because the case of asylum, it's imprescriptible.
Yes.
We have to open doors to people.
Protect people.
People in a real situation of threats, and we need to protect. Asylum is undisputable. The rest is normal migration. It's a product of globalization today. Everybody has, access through mobile phone, TV.
But why some European countries, they're building fences and walls?
No, you have very few fences. You have just one limit between Hungary and Serbia to contain flows from Syria. It was a specific factor. It's useless today. The only effective fence is between 2 small Spanish enclaves and Morocco. It's the only situation. The good thing to do is to organize a mobility pact, let's say between Spain and Morocco, France and Morocco, Algeria and Western African country, maybe by profession, to organize training for people, to pay the trips, and to send them back with capacity to take part of the development of their country.
And to live decent life.
Because if you have if you're young in Africa or leaving Africa, who will take care of their country? One day I was in Tanzania in a program organized by the French Institute, an embassy, about migration. I had a talk with a young journalist from Tanzania. He was coming back from a program of training in France on media. And he told me, why to go to Europe? Africa is booming. He was so proud to be a citizen
and contributing to the development of the country.
But we can contribute with training. If they need training outside, we can organize that, mobility. Right. But we have to do that honestly. Of course, and we have to kill, to destroy the traffic, human traffic. We cannot accept that anymore.
Mr. Fouché, let us just focus on different aspects. That is, how can you explain the rise of nationalism, chauvinism in European politics right now?
Well, first, they are still a minority.
It is a phenomenon.
Yes, but this is multiplied by media, and especially social network. I'm very critical to certain misuse of social network because you don't see the general trend. Democracy is alive, especially in Germany. In Germany, you have a specific former East German factor.
Yes, still.
And also you have, what is new in Europe is in countries where you had few inequalities, high level of of standard of life, complete social security, big revenue like Sweden, and still you have small group of people, let's say 20%, supporting populist forces. Why? The answer is very simple. First, Sweden was very generous, maybe too much. Second, they say, we built ourselves and our father, our state providence. They are coming, migrants. They are benefiting from what we built ourselves, and they did nothing to build it by themselves. Mm-hmm. So we have to, this is a political fight. We have to explain them that, you know, precisely migrants contribute to production, social system, etc. But at the same time, we have to control our border. We have to control our border.
Mr. Fouché, why Arab Spring fails? Is this a correct formulation of the question?
Except in Tunisia, because now counter-revolution is everywhere, except in Tunisia. But Tunisia has a very long
it took some compromises.
Story of openness after Bourguiba. And some political parties like Ennahda learn a lot from
Egyptian model.
From playing, you know, democratic rule. This is the only example of not unsuccessful story. Everywhere else, counter-revolution impose itself. And it's a pity because they are losing time. They have the same problem with globalization, except oil and gas producer, you know. You have crisis in Syria, Iraq, it's a different story because this is
Libya.
Libya was, I must confess, it was a huge mistake by
your former president.
Former president and
Sarkozy
and Britain. It was a big mistake because Libya was a country of job provider for Western Egypt, Southern Tunisia, and Northern Sahelian countries. It was a big mistake.
We have watched Tony Blair offer his apology for this political mistake.
Not Sarkozy.
But not Sarkozy.
No.
Because it's still in politics, I think.
No, but it's difficult for me to criticize a former French president, but it was a big mistake. It's so easy to destroy.
Correct.
And so difficult to build again.
Another question. Do you think that the factor of political reform and change in the Arab world by this counter forces against the Arab Spring it still exists and valid? And do you think that constitutional monarchy for the region will be at the horizon and result an end to this political reform?
Yes, but Morocco is Morocco.
Mm-hmm.
And Morocco was never a colony.
Correct.
It was a protectorate. It was never under Turkish rule.
Yes. It was not part of
Morocco
Ottoman
is Morocco. I think every Arab Spring, so-called Arab Spring, were all national movement, specifically national movement. Even if in the Arab world there is what I call a common basin of interpretation because of the language, because of the religion, because of movies, Kalsoon, etc., video, etc. You have an interpretation, so you have a domino effect.
Yes.
In Iraq, the problem is which political space the Shia minority is giving to the Sunni minority, which are a lot of difficulty to accept that she is not anymore in power. So the only way is is my view, it's confederation in Iraq. Confederation, not split. Confederation.
Confederation.
In Iraq. So the Sunni people should be offered or possibility to be part of the central power. In Syria, it's a very different story because it's a very humanitarian regime. Alawi people, 10%, 12% of the population. They are not. There is no record. There is no track record in Syrian political history in the last 50 years of capacity for compromise. And in that case, the Sunni are a majority, 70%. They are out of power. So whatever the settlement, Russian diplomacy, Iranian diplomacy, and maybe will impose, they postpone the problem. In any system, people need to feel that they are represented at the central power, even if it is complicated.
Correct.
So I'm not pessimistic for Iraq. I'm very pessimistic for long-term political settlement in Syria. Monarchies, why not? I think monarchies were able to adapt very quickly. In Morocco, they changed the constitution.
Correct.
And in Jordan.
And Jordan as
also.
well. Correct.
In Bahrain, they were not able to do that for obvious reasons. In the Emirates, it's a rather complex situation, but they have a very... we tend in Europe to compare the Emirates in strategic terms as the Prussia of the region.
Ah, okay.
You know,
yes.
Prussia of the region, or Sparta.
Sparta, okay.
Athens, you know.
Yes.
But they have a strategy. And when you go to Abu Dhabi for a meeting with strategic think tank, it's always rewarding because they are not ideologues.
Yes.
They are making strategy, which is not exactly the case in Qatar, for example. It's more complex in Qatar, where ideology is more important than in the Emirates. But we had, when I was in charge of the Institute of Defense Studies, we have always
exchange views.
People from Qatar in our team. Eh?
Regarding the Europe again, I would like to ask you, as not geographer, but as an intellectual, that President Macron offered an apology for the colonial time in Algeria, and there was systematic kind of torture against that time. As intellectual, how do you perceive that? Because we think in France there's a division between intellectual and politicians and all that right now, and it is long overdue. I mean, this president has the courage to say that, unlike the former president. How do you perceive that? And do you think this will heal the wounds of colonial time?
I fully support that, and you may know that first, Macron is 40 years old.
Yeah.
So he is not of this generation. When I was young, I had friends whose grandbrother were in Algeria making war. So it was a domestic discussion every Sunday. Mm-hmm. We were waiting for news, photos. Are they alive? So, and Algeria was much more than French colony. It was a set of 3 French district. Mm. Okay, so it's most complicated issue we have to face. President Macron, who is also an intellectual and a reader of books, was clever enough and wise enough to listen to advice of major intellectuals and historians in France, notably Benjamin Stora, the best intellectual on Algerian affairs. And he is trusted by Algerians, by the way. Mm-hmm. So Macron made a big step. Except that at one day, if we open archives, we would like also the National Liberation Front of Algeria to open also its archives.
In equal footing.
We need to be two to tango.
To open dialogue.
Yes, and it's too early for them to do that because the war is too close. Former soldiers are in power, and the relation with France is a factor of internal Algerian policy.
Correct, yes.
If you want to criticize somebody in Algeria, more open to, let's say, democracy or rule of law, you tell him, "Hez França." You are from the French party.
Yes.
They did the same with Arab language, which is not so easy to study mathematics or physics in Arab language.
History is so complicated, yeah.
It's complicated. They lost a lot. And it's a pity because it's a very rich country. And they want to leave the country, the young. Why? You understand?
Mr. Fouché,
so
yeah. I got the point.
Be sure that we are active with Algeria. We are very active. We want to improve things.
Yes. This is good. I mean, this is a voice of intellectual in France that's supporting the position that has been taken by President Macron, apologizing for some of the black spot in the history.
It's not finished. We will
it's
continue.
Not finished.
We will continue.
I mean, maybe we can talk about the fragmentation of Europe. I think we are just about to conclude. You have an article that you talk about defragmentation of Europe before. Do you think the European Union will survive against all these internal challenges?
Yes, but like Africa, maybe in a different way. European unity is a Christian myth because Christianity in Europe was split in the 11th century when Orthodox, decided not to recognize the Rome authority, and after that division in religion. So the myth of unity is basically supported by Rome and the Pope and the Vatican. And no Pope was able to travel to Russia. Mm-hmm. So you have competition. Second, you have a strong fundamental, which is culture and civilization.
Yes.
We share a lot. We share a lot, linked to small differences and what British philosopher David Hume called friction. He compared Europe and China. China is one language, one system. Europe is always about differences. And my book on Europe was entitled Fragments of Europe, because we want to build a kind of mosaic from fragments. But we have many bases to do that. Democracy.
We have 30 seconds, sorry, to finish up. We have 30 seconds to finish up.
And for European Union, thanks to Trump, Putin, and Xi, we will survive.
This is a good statement to finish with and to end up this, because it have a lot of indicators, but we're really very thankful for your time with us.
Thank you
and for this discussion.
Thank
it's
you.
broadened our
Thank
scope
you.
for understanding different complicated issues in history in Africa, in Europe, and to address geopolitics and other current political trends in the region and at the international level. أعزائي المشاهدين، نشكر لكم حسن المتابعة والمشاهدة بعد أن طوفنا مع الدكتور ميشيل فوشي، حيث ناقشنا كثير جدا من القضايا واستفدنا من خبرته، وهو أستاذ وكرسي الجغرافيا السياسية التطبيقية في المعاهد والجامعات الفرنسية، وأيضا مستشار وعضو في مجلس السياسة الخارجية في فرنسا. قدم لنا كثير من الإجابات المستبطنة من صفحات التاريخ من مظاهر السياسة الراهنة والتحديات الإقليمية والدولية. تقبلوا تحياتي خالد موسى وتحيات الفريق العامل، وإلى اللقاء في حلقة أخرى. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Thank you very much.
Thank you.